If you just joined us, this is the Daily Bible Reading Show. My name is Calvin, and this is live from Cambridge, from my home here in Cambridge, UK. Thank you for joining me. And so let's look at our first passage, 2 Chronicles chapter 27. There's so much stuff here. Let me get it out of the way. Can't see the screen. And we pick up with Jotham. Jotham was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. He did that which was right in Yahweh's eyes, according to all that his father Uzziah had done. However, he didn't enter into Yahweh's temple. The people still acted corruptly. He built the upper gate of Yahweh's house, and he built much on the wall of Ophel. Moreover, he built cities in the hill country of Judah, and in the forest he built fortresses and towers. He also fought with the king of the children of Ammon and prevailed against them. The children of Ammon gave him the same year 100 talents of silver, 10,000 cores of wheat, and 10,000 cores of barley. The children of Ammon also gave that much to him in the second year and in the third. So Jotham became mighty, because he ordered his ways before Yahweh his God. Now the rest of the acts of Jotham and all his wars and his ways, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. Jotham slept with his fathers, and they buried him in David's city, and Ahaz his son reign in his place. So far so good. Jotham takes over from his dad Uzziah, and because he ordered his ways according to Yahweh his God, things worked well. The Ammonites whom he fought, he beat them, and they were paying him tribute, and so far so good. That's the idea. It sets things up for chapter 28 for this guy named Ahaz his son. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He didn't do that which was right in Yahweh's eyes like David his father, but he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and also made molten images for the Baals. Moreover, he burned incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom, and burned his children in the fire, according to the abominations of the nations whom Yahweh cast out before the children of Israel. He sacrificed and burned incense in the high places, and on the hills, and under every tree, every green tree. By the way, when it says here that he burned incense and he burned his children in the fire, it's not just talking about how cruel he is. Though he is, to kill your own children. But this was part of his worship, the worship of the idols, of the gods of his day. And this was very despicable in God's eyes. This was not something God would ever ask his people to do, and especially his king. But again, it's a byproduct of him chasing after other gods. The cruelty and, that's just a byproduct of that. But it's when your heart leaves God, then therefore all these things probably didn't seem that bad in his eyes. He was just doing what all the other idol worshippers were doing. Verse 5. Therefore Yahweh his God delivered him into the hand of this king of Syria. They struck him and carried away from him a great multitude of captives and brought them to Damascus. He was also delivered into the hand of the king of Israel, who struck him with great slaughter. So two kings, Syria and Israel, and defeated him. For Pekah, the son of Remaliah, killed in Judah 120,000 in one day, all of them valiant men, because they had forsaken Yahweh, the God of their fathers. Zikri, a mighty man of Ephraim, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, Azrikam, the ruler of the house, and Elkanah, who was next to the king. The children of Israel carried away captive of their brothers 200,000 women, sons, and daughters, and also took away much plunder from them, and brought the plunder to Samaria. So again, Israel is north of Judah, and Israel, though were descendants, 10 tribes, so part of that same family, they had broken away. They had their own king, and they were constantly at war, and therefore they were seen as not the kind of direction that Judah should have taken. And that's why when the king did badly, you say, oh, he was like the king of Israel. So we're noting that differences between the kingdom and the king of Israel, and here in talking Ahaz, the king of Judah. So carried away 200,000. Yep. Okay. Verse 9. But a prophet of Yahweh was there, whose name was Oded. And he went out to meet the army that came to Samaria, and said to them, Behold, because Yahweh the God of your fathers was angry with Judah, so the kingdom down south, he has delivered them into your hand, the kingdom of the north. And you have slain them in a rage which has reached up to heaven. Now you intend to degrade the children of Judah and Jerusalem as male and female slaves for yourselves. Aren't there even with you trespasses of your own against Yahweh your God? Now hear me therefore, and send back the captives that you've taken captive from your brothers. Literally your brothers, their descendants. For the fierce wrath of Yahweh is on you. Then some of the heads of the children of Ephraim, Azariah the son of Johanan, Berechiah the son of Meshillemoth, Jehizkiah the son of Shallum, and Amasa the son of Hadlai, stood up against those who came from the war, and said to them, You must not bring in the captives here, for you intend that which will bring on us a trespass against Yahweh, to add to our sins and to our guilt. For our guilt is great, and there is a fierce wrath against Israel. So the armed men left the captives and the plunder before the princes and all the assembly. The men who had been mentioned by name rose up and took the captives, and with the plunder clothed all who were naked among them, dressed them, gave them sandals, and gave them something to eat and to drink, anointed them, and carried all the feeble of them on donkeys, and brought them to Jericho, the city of palm trees, to their brothers. Then they returned to Samaria. That's incredible. At that time, King Ahaz sent to the kings of Assyria to help him. For again, the Edomites had come and struck Judah and carried away captives. So wow, they're just being hammered, from all directions. Syria, Israel, and now Edom. And so now he's asking from another superpower, Assyria, different from Syria, Assyria, asking for help. The Philistines also had invaded the cities of the lowland and of the south of Judah, and had taken Beth-Shemesh, Aijalon, Gederoth, Soko with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and also Gimzo and its villages, and they lived there. For Yahweh brought Judah low because of Ahaz king of Israel, because he acted without restraint in Judah and trespassed severely against Yahweh. Tiglath-Pilneser, I thought Pileser, but Pilneser, king of Assyria, came to him and gave him trouble, but he didn't strengthen him. For Ahaz took away a portion out of Yahweh's house and out of the house of the king and of the princes, and gave it to the king of Assyria, but it didn't help him. In the time of his distress, he trespassed yet more against Yahweh, the same king Ahaz, for he sacrificed to the gods of Damascus, which struck him. He said, Because the gods of the kings of Syria helped them, so I will sacrifice to them, that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him and of all Israel. Ahaz gathered together the vessels of God's house, and cut the vessels of God's house in pieces, and shut up the doors of Yahweh's house. And he made himself altars in every corner of Jerusalem. In every city of Judah, he made high places to burn incense to other gods, and provoked Yahweh, the God of his fathers, to anger. So it just gets from worse, from bad to worse, where this king, he is defeated by this nation, and therefore what goes through his mind? Oh, I will worship the God of this nation that has defeated me. And in order to worship that God, he sacrifices all the treasures of his own God. He breaks out all the pieces of the treasures from the temple. And it doesn't make sense. But it does, on the other hand, it does make sense. Where you copy, the idolatry of your oppressors, where you forsake, the goodness of your own God. And remember, God was good to his dad. He followed God. And I think the reason was because he had already turned away. And he just didn't want to turn back. He'd gone out so far down this track of idolatry and leaving God that he thought, what's the worst that can happen? I might as well just go all the way and get deeper. And that's the thing about, sin. Sin is often not just one thing, but it's often a spiral. It keep going down and further away from God and deeper into sin. Verse 26, now the rest of his acts and all his ways, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city, even in Jerusalem, because they didn't bring him into the tombs of the kings of Israel. And Hezekiah his son reigned in his place. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Reading this historical book, essentially, of these kings. And today you can buy biographies of, Barack Obama has a biography. All the presidents, all the prime ministers, the kings even, literal kings, you can read history books about them. And you can see that essentially what we would commit as, our own sins, pride, selfishness, or whatnot, they're amplified when you're in a position of power. They're amplified when you're in a position of influence, such that when you sin, the consequences of sin is paid by the whole nation. And that's the thing about this king. He sins in idolatry, the whole nation is defeated and carried away as captives. Interesting as well that Israel, who's always been portrayed as these, people who have turned away from God, at this point, they listen to God. They release the captives and they actually clothe them and they send them back home in safety. Whereas Judah, who's meant to have this king and, a son of David, forsakes God. And it's all the more shameful, when the nations obey God more than us. So that's 2 Chronicles. Very, very interesting. I find it really fascinating because it seems so current. It seems like what you would find happening today. Yeah.